Welcome to whofooadventures. This is the next video in our continuing series on the Sedona Vegfest 2020.
In this video, Wayne Dysinger, who is a medical doctor, shares with us his view on being plant-based and lifestyle medicine.
Let's watch.
So I want to just give the context of lifestyle medicine sort of in a bigger picture. So there's this whole movement called lifestyle medicine that's growing. Along with it, it sort of grew out of the plant-based movement to some extent. Some of the early pioneers in the lifestyle medicine movement were people like Pollan Campbell and Caldwell Esselstyn and Dean Ornish. But this movement is growing out of doctors who say we're sick and tired of having the usual tools that we were trained in medical school. And when I went to medical school, I was trained in this part of this triangle, right? I was trained how to do procedures and how to prescribe medication. And in fact, if you think about your doctor, or you think about the healthcare system, at least the healthcare system, the way it's more or less been up till now, it spends its time up here. But if you think of the causes of disease, if you think of how we spend money in healthcare, almost all of it, well, 80% of it at least, is chronic diseases. And if you think of chronic diseases and really look at the science, like Dr. Greger was showing us, 80% of it is related to lifestyle. And lifestyle includes, we think of it as 4 pillars. Those 4 pillars are, we use the term nourishment, movement. For here we use the term resilience. Resilience is sleep and stress and how we renew our bodies. And this is connectedness. So how we connect, and we talk about a horizontal connectedness, so it's important, our friends and our family relationships, but we also talk about a vertical connectedness, so it's important our purpose and our meaning in life and whatever spirituality that we bring to the table. So these 4 things together is what helps us reverse chronic disease. So in our practice, we always start down here. So we start off working with our patients around those 4 pillars. And then if we need to, we'll go into some supplements and some other science-based kinds of things here that are lower risk and lower cost than the typical medical piece. And then we're still medical doctors, so we still know how to do this. And there's a time to do this kind of thing as well. But most of us should be starting down here when we're approaching our health. We're talking here at the Vegfest mainly about one of those 4 pillars, and that is the nourishment pillar. When we think about nourishment, we think about these areas. So it's not just food, it's also anything that we're putting in from a liquid perspective, and actually anything else that's coming into our system. So nourishment hopefully is good, but there's a lot of things that we can be exposed to, especially toxic substances. I think that's something that we don't spend near enough time thinking about. Plastics and other kinds of cleaners and other chemicals that our body can be exposed to. But again, for this talk, we're going to focus primarily on the nourishment piece. And when we think about nourishment, I think about Michael Pollan's book, In Defense of Food. Anybody read In Defense of Food? So a few of you here have read the book. In this book, on this head of lettuce, there's a yellow ribbon that says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Now, Michael Pollan was not a scientist, he's a journalist, but he was very good at summarizing scientific information. And he spent a lot of time thinking about food, thinking about diet, thinking about nourishment, and he feels like these are the words that you can use to summarize how we should eat. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And as I think of the lifestyle medicine movement is growing rapidly, not just in the US, but around the world. And as I go to different cultures, you know, Australia, Great Britain, Asian, Latin American cultures, the interpretation of how you approach lifestyle, and specifically how you approach nourishment, food is always the thing that's most interesting to people. There's different ways of looking at it, different ways of understanding the science, but everyone agrees on this basic concept of eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So just looking at that a little bit more, food, when Michael Pollan says food, he's talking about real food or whole food. And what is real food or whole food? Well, I like to think about it as food the way it was grown. And when you think about food the way it was grown, One of the ways that I think about it is what's changed between when it was on the plant and when it's going into your mouth. So if you think about apples, if you're eating a whole apple, that food has grown. If you're eating applesauce, obviously there's been some change. And so, then you can keep going down. Apple juice, there's more change. Apple pie, you're starting to do other ingredients. You can get to some apple candies, and it's really not even food. It's sort of a chemical thing that is sold sometimes as food. But this is, I think, the most important recommendation of the eat food, not too much, mostly plants, is eat whole food. Now, science has had a little bit of a hard time defining what whole food is. There is this classification, the scientific classification, NOVA Food Classification Group, and they divide it into these 4 categories. And when I work with patients, and I spend most of my time seeing patients, I find it hard to describe the differences. And what's relatively easy to describe is this: unprocessed or minimally processed foods. That's what we were just talking about. So if you cut something, that's minimally processing. So it's actually not technically a whole food, it's minimally processed. Or if you steam something, or if you freeze it, all of that's minimally processing food. But minimally processed food is fine. It's good for you, it's healthy for you, your body tends to like it. So people can understand unprocessed or minimally processed food. They can also tend to understand ultra-processed food. In the United States, there's this estimate that 65% of the average American's calories comes from ultra-processed food. And the definition of ultra-processed food that I like the best is ingredients that you can't find in your typical kitchen. So if you're reading the food label and there's things in there that you can't go home and find in your kitchen, it's an ultra-processed food. And it's something that we should stay away from. So what are the exact guidelines? I don't know exactly, but this is something that we use. 80% of the calories should come from unprocessed or minimally processed foods. We should spend our time really trying to do this, and most of us aren't anywhere close to that. And then when you get down to this ultra-processed food, ideally we have none of it. But if you're going to have some of it, keep it to 5% of calories per day or less, which means that you're going to have 1 serving or less of anything that comes from a bag or a box or the middle sections of the grocery store. And so what does mostly plants mean? And again, there's a lot of different interpretations. Some people will say mostly plants is 51% of your calories or more. Other people say mostly plants means 100% of your calories. Again, following Dr. Greger, I sort of feel guilty about saying you can have 5% of your calories come from meat, fish, dairy, and eggs. So exactly how you interpret mostly plants is a little bit up for debate, at least how I understand it. But the point is, most of us aren't even in this category. And just for me personally, I'm pretty close to 100% of my calories come from vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds because of how I understand the science.
We acknowledge that not all of you eat 100% of your calories from plants. We believe that in order to be fully sustainable in your health, for the animals, and for our planet, we must eat 100% of our calories from plants.
I like what Dr. T. Colin Campbell says when he talks about this, what percentage of your diet should be plant-based. And he says, why not try to go for 100%? Because the animal foods are, for one thing, addicting, and it's hard to eat animal foods in moderation because you get that taste for those foods. So why not just shoot for 100% and go for it and just do the best you can? And that's what he recommends, and that's what I like too.
I do too.
Anyway, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos from our Sedona Vegfest 2020 series.